So first off, we want to thank everyone for being here and welcome you to our Conservation Conversation series. This series allows us students to invite guests with different roles within the broad conservation and cultural heritage preservation community to share their knowledge with us. Today, we are so excited to welcome Geoff Emberling and Suzanne Davis. Geoff is an associate research scientist at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology at the University of Michigan and has been co-director of the International Kururu Archaeological Project since 2014. He has also held positions as curator and museum director. Suzanne Davis is curator of conservation at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology at the University of Michigan and is the current president of the American Institute for Conservation. She is the director of conservation for the Kelsey's Field Project in the Sudan and also on projects in Egypt and Turkey. And so with that, I will hand it over to Geoff and Suzanne.
So I'll start talking while Geoff is slide sharing. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm happy to be here with Geoff to share some of our work with archaeological conservation and community in Sudan. I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize if my voice is not great. And I want to say as we get started that normally for a virtual talk like this, several of our Sudanese colleagues would be with us. But as you may know, a war broke out in Sudan about a month ago. The war is between rival military leaders who have extensively bombed the capital city of Khartoum, and the humanitarian situation in Sudan is pretty terrible right now. On the screen, you see a small hotel, the Acropole, which was run by 3 Sudanese brothers of Greek ancestry. And for at least 50 years, it was the Khartoum home. We'll stay on this for a while, Geoff. It was the Khartoum home of archaeological projects working in Sudan, with both foreign and Sudanese archaeological business and fixing happening there pretty much around the clock. And a few days into this war, it was occupied by one of these military factions, the Rapid Support Forces, and the people who were there had just a few hours to leave. And I'm starting off by saying this because most of our Sudanese colleagues who lived in Khartoum have left the city, but we're really worried for their safety and for their livelihoods. And we are sad right now, and so some of that may come through in our talk today. But George Hagulatos, one of the brothers who ran this hotel, said to me once, "You must always have hope in this world." So we'll talk to you today from a place of hope, and we are also speaking with you from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe peoples, including the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, and some other First Nations as well. In Ann Arbor, I head the conservation department for the University of Michigan's Kelsey Museum of Archaeology, and I've been directing conservation work at El-Kurru for about 10 years. And Geoff, I am going to pass this over to you now.
All right. So, hi, everyone. I want to just begin by introducing the archaeological site and the community in which we have been working for these last 10 or 11 years. The field project is based at El-Kurru, which is a village here that you see next to the Nile, and you can see a map on the left indicating that it's in northern Sudan. It's roughly halfway between Khartoum and the Egyptian border. Normally, a talk like this would begin with the archaeological site, but because we're really emphasizing the community role, we want to begin by talking about the people who live there, and talk a little bit about their history and their conception of their own heritage and how that relates in interesting ways to the kind of conservation work and the approach that we've been able to take. So the people who live in El-Kurru today are mostly belong to an ethnic group known as Shaigia. It's not a group that is well known outside Sudan, by contrast, for example, with Nubian, which is more widely known. But anyway, the people in El-Kurru are mostly Shaigia. They're Arabic speaking and they're Muslim. And their documented history in this location goes back to the 16th century. when they established their independence from a regional power known as the Funj Sultanate of Sanar. Shaigia genealogies trace their descent even further back from an ancestor named Shaig, who came from Arabia as early as the 7th century CE. So that's their own conception of genealogy. But place names and the local Arabic dialect make it clear that much of the population that lives there today is actually descended from a medieval Christian Nubian kingdom called Makuria. And here you see Makuria there, its capital was at Dongola, which you see on the map. And you can see an example of some of the church paintings that surprised me when I first started working in Nubia as being part of this area. So both scholars and non-specialists, if they know about this area at all, tend to know it as Nubia. But that is a later Greek term derived from an ethnic group known as the Noba, who first appeared in the historical record in the 3rd century BCE. And the local ancient name for the region was Kush. So Nubia is anachronistic for the ancient time periods that we're talking about. The archaeological site at El-Kurru is a royal pyramid burial cemetery, first excavated by George Reisner on behalf of Harvard and the Museum of Fine Arts in 1918 to 1919. Reisner discovered that the kings and queens of ancient Kush who were buried at El-Kurru included most of the kings who conquered and ruled over Egypt as its 25th dynasty, which is the whole cemetery, or the bulk of the cemetery is roughly 850 to 650 BCE. And the site is part of really the heartland of the ancient empire of Kush that includes a number of other sites that we're not really going to be talking about today. But together, that group of sites forms a UNESCO World Heritage Area known as Jebel Barkal and the sites of the Napatan region. So when we first launched this archaeological project in 2013, it began as really just a traditional archaeological research project. And today, by that, of course, I mean colonial, extractive, and unenlightened, not particularly looking to connect with the community and not particularly looking for to make sure that the project benefited the community as much as it benefited the International Archaeological Team. So this slide shows more or less the moment when that began to change. So we did what a lot of archaeological projects do, and we had an evening event where we showed some slides, and we showed a video that National Geographic had made the previous year. And the people who came were all of the men that we'd hired to work on the project, and they couldn't understand the video, but they liked seeing themselves on screen. That was pretty exciting. And then we talked about our research, kind of straightforward. And then we got into a conversation about, what questions they might have and so on. And so I'll just mention one question that was posed, which really took me off guard. And this is really the spark that began this turn toward community engagement. And that was the question of whether we thought that the ancient Kushites had darker skin tone than the people who lived in El-Kurru today. And this completely took me off guard because, of course, that is not what I was there to find out, or I was not thinking about that kind of thing. But it turns out that it had a reflection, a very direct reflection in the Shaigia heritage narrative. And that is, so their theory about this was that they were connected to the Arabian Peninsula, and that therefore, unlike the ancient Kushites, they, had a lot of Arabic genes in them, and that they should be lighter in skin tone. So I bring that up because it introduces the idea that, in fact, the people who live in the village don't really think of themselves as descendants of the ancient culture, of the ancient pyramids that are right in their backyard. And so this is not that uncommon in Sudan, which is incredibly diverse ethnically, and there's a range of different sorts of heritage stories and connections. And so one of my colleagues, Rebecca Bradshaw, has introduced the term non-descendant communities for communities who live next to, or I should say she's deployed this term in Sudan, for communities who live next to archaeological sites but don't see themselves as directly related to them through heritage. So that particular conversation set up a framework for us of how to engage with people in the community. And so at this point, I will turn it back over to Suzanne. We're going to kind of go back and forth in this talk. And now, Suzanne, you're it.
Okay. So now we're going to back up for a second and go back to the big question of why invest time, effort, and money in community engaged work? And the answer is there are so many reasons, many of them well documented in the literature. It helps prevent and resolve problems and misunderstandings. Community members may have good ideas and knowledge to contribute to the archaeological research work. New projects of benefit to both the site and the community can be developed. Community engaged work can also be reparative. So archaeology in most places has colonial roots, may still be practiced in a colonial way, but definitely the history of archaeology is of objects being removed from sites for display in international museums and foreign research questions being addressed, while local questions were not. And fieldwork practices and historical narratives being created by outsiders. Community-focused projects can work to redress some of these things. And then I personally think that personal enrichment is a really undervalued benefit of this kind of work. Investing in collaborative work develops friendships, connections, and learning. Finally, community-engaged archaeology and conservation can assist with site protection. And we do have site protection issues at El-Kurru. Kids and visitors like to carve their names into the ancient monuments, which are made of very soft local sandstone. And that's a really popular thing to do when you visit a site. Kids also like to throw rocks at the big remaining pyramid at El-Kurru. And if that seems weird to you, I will just note that my brother and his friends as kids, like that was one of their favorite things to do, was to throw rocks at things. So I think it's a cross-cultural phenomenon. And here you see team members reviewing school worksheets with the local demographic that's most responsible for at least the rock throwing activities. So to quickly run through some of our other big conservation challenges at El-Kurru, Geoff, can you take us to the rock cut funerary temple? This is made of very soft sandstone, like all the monuments that we work with in Sudan. And this also has hundreds of ancient devotional graffiti carved into it. And let's look at one of the graffiti now. So here's one of them. This is 2 horses and a bird. And if you're interested in learning more about El-Kurru's ancient graffiti and the conservation work to preserve them, Geoff and I curated an exhibition about this, and we also edited a book, and you can download it for free from the exhibition website, which is called Graffiti as Devotion Along the Nile. So just Google Graffiti as Devotion Along the Nile, and you can find that. And then let's have a look at the Kururu 1 pyramid now. So it's so hard to believe, but this is the largest remaining pyramid in Sudan. It's the only one where visitors can enter the tomb chamber. And it's made of dry laid masonry, mostly ashlar block exterior with a rubble fill. And because the top of it is gone, by the top of it, I mean most of it, it's structurally quite compromised. And this pyramid also has ancient graffiti on the exterior. Oh, thank you, Saiful. You've just put the publication into the chat. So Geoff, let's also see, there are 2 beautifully painted tombs at the site. These belong to King Tenmutemani and his mother, Queen Talhada. And you see her tomb on the screen. And we have been working with a small team from the MFA Boston to conserve these. And I know I saw Pam Hatchfield on the call, and she is one of the members of that team. Okay, let's see. Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. So then, at any site, like you would be with any site, we're concerned about overall site protection and preservation and conservation issues for the whole site. And this is a part of the project where the archaeological team really has a lot that we can contribute. And I should say that despite a century of active archaeological excavation in Sudan, there's been very little investment in conservation in the country. Our work in this area at El-Kurru has changed how local residents view the site. Work on conservation and site preservation projects has helped people appreciate and value the site in ways they didn't before. And on the right here, you see Anwar Mahjoub and Bakri Abdelbonem. They grew up right next to the site. They played soccer kind of in the shadow of the pyramid. But when we first started working there, they told me that they had previously thought archaeology was kind of boring. Archaeology and history wasn't really for them. And they didn't become interested in it until they started working with the project team. And now they are completely hooked, to the point that Anwar is about to start a PhD program at University of Michigan, looking in part at archaeological and community heritage. And today they are also on the leadership team for the El-Kurru Community Heritage Center. So Geoff, let's go to the next slide. And I just want to kind of walk you through how our community work at El-Kurru has developed. And I want to cover some of the questions, processes, and challenges that we've thought about. And so the first big kind of question is, what is community? And this word is often used in archaeological and conservation literature to mean the local residents near a site, and we are using it like that today. But really, we think about community in a much broader way, as including like the full range of stakeholders who are interested in the site and who care about it. And that includes local residents, but also members of the archaeological team, both Sudanese and foreign, people who are local residents and members of the archaeological project team. There are quite a number of those folks. And then visitors to the site, both Sudanese and foreign. And the site does get quite a number of international tourists. So the Community Heritage Center project that Geoff will talk about in more detail has engaged all of these groups as the project has developed. Let's go to the next slide. So our project team thinks about community engaged work as a spectrum, evolving from education and outreach all the way to a co-created collaborative project like the Community Heritage Center. And I'm just going to like talk through some different examples of these types of activities. So education and outreach might include socializing with the site's neighbors, building relationships, talking about the work, inviting teachers or students to visit the site and learn about the project, visiting schools to talk about the research, and giving public lectures. And examples of consultation might include asking local school teachers and residents for advice when designing site tours, websites, or other educational products, building a list of major stakeholders with whom you can discuss site management, important new projects, or problems to get their feedback. It might include creating a formal advisory board to weigh in on major issues affecting the site. Cooperation to us means working together to make important projects happen to benefit the site or the community. And this might include bringing electricity to the site, installing a gate to limit vehicle access, asking if the police can patrol more often, or helping the community, sorry, I lost my place for a second, or like helping a community member get a fellowship abroad, or maybe even find support for a medical clinic. And finally, collaboration to us means the co-creation of projects. And the right-hand end of the spectrum, the cooperation and collaboration end, I think is the most interesting, because the things the archaeological team cares most about, things like site preservation and specific archaeological research questions, are not likely to be the same things that other community members care most about. So the right-hand side of this is where the more creative work happens, I think. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So our process of creating the Heritage Center was organic. We started with no plans or even ideas about a community heritage project. It all started simply by socializing and sharing information informally. And as village residents realized we enjoyed and were interested in local culture, they began to share this more and more. For example, by inviting us to meet local craftspeople. And we shared info about the archaeological site and its preservation challenges. The site and the village were not linked very much when we first started working there. So the tourists would come and they would pull up in their buses and they would visit the painted tombs, and then they would get back in the buses and they would go. And local residents, while all that was going on, didn't know that much about the site or what the archaeological team was doing there. And so gradually it began to seem like a good idea to really interweave the archaeological site and the local community more. And we started to co-develop projects like a photo contest that Geoff is going to talk about more, K through 12 lesson plans and worksheets. We developed a walking tour of the site, and finally, ideas about a community heritage center began to take shape. And all of this work was highly social and enjoyable. We enjoyed sharing our knowledge, and local residents enjoyed sharing their history and their culture. So let's go to the next slide. Our relationships and trust were built in part through shared work on the archaeological project, including 2 projects that I worked on: conservation of the funerary temple and documentation and preservation of its ancient graffiti. And Abdelbaki, shown here in both images, at left he's cleaning some graffiti and at right he's playing a drum. We worked together daily for weeks before I learned that he was also the drummer in the local band. So for Abdelbaki and others working with the team, learning more about the process of archaeology and conservation was really fascinating. And at a certain point, we began to be offered musical concerts with some regularity. So that was a great side benefit for us. Geoff, let's go to the next slide. So in our community engaged work in El-Kurru, Geoff and I found that our backgrounds in museology were helpful. So for exhibitions, we're used to working iteratively through focus groups and evaluation. And we found that way of thinking and working to be really helpful in developing collaborative projects at El-Kurru. And our kind of main takeaways on process for this type of work are to stay curious and open, to let things take time. That's really important. To invest in relationships actively, to be flexible and change and edit ideas as you go. And kind of a major reflection on all of this is that the process or method of working is on its own an important outcome of this kind of work. Let's go to the next slide. So we had some advantages as we started to develop collaborative projects in El-Kurru. We had been living with a local family for years. We'd been welcomed into the village. But we also had some challenges because we did have very close relationships with several families. It was more natural to gravitate towards working with those people. And it was a little bit harder to reach beyond our existing circle. And it's also true that not everyone is interested in cultural heritage. And so people self-select in and out of community heritage projects. Different members of the community may also have very different ideas about what to do. And local elites may have their own agendas, which is definitely something that we ran into. Let's go to the next slide. Another major challenge we had was gender. This is just kind of an example of a cultural difference. So foreign team members working on the project as this community heritage center idea began to develop, we hoped as foreigners that women would play a really prominent role in this center, helping to plan the center and its programming, maybe serving on its board, and or creating women-centered spaces or activities at the center. And this turned out to be pretty difficult to navigate. So our foreign ideas about this were not shared by all village residents, or at least not by all of the male residents. And not everybody in the village agreed that it was a good idea for women to participate. Many women didn't seem interested at all, actually. Others were interested, but they needed permission from their male relatives to participate, and they couldn't necessarily get it. And even though equitable gender participation seemed kind of slim in the village, we weren't really completely willing to let that go. And this year we learned that the young men who have really taken the initiative and been most involved in leadership of this project were maybe not the best ambassadors for reaching out to women in the village. It turns out that, I mean, we didn't really realize this until we saw some of the interactions ourselves. And it turns out they're just really, really shy with women. And this year, an early career Sudanese archaeologist, a woman, Rahab Ismail, got involved with this aspect of the project. And suddenly, you know, the interest and participation of women just grew exponentially. So thank goodness for Rahab.
Suzanne, can I just
Yeah.
jump in here? I think this has been a huge headache for us for a really long time, but it also really illustrates what community engagement is like, you know, or one of the features of community engagement, which is that it can often be kind of embarrassing. Like, if you're really trying and you're really open, you fail a lot in ways that just in retrospect just seem stupid.
Yeah.
So like, why didn't we ask Rahab, you know, 10 years ago? Well, she was 8 or whatever at the time. But anyway, I mean, and this kind of thing happens with regularity. So
yeah, I also think too, you know, we had seen Anwar and Bakri and some of our other young Sudanese, you know, guy colleagues, we had seen them socially interacting and it seemed fine. So it didn't occur to me that, you know, kind of outside their own social circles, it would be a lot harder. Yeah. So let's go to the next slide now. Another challenge is that it's been really difficult to find funding for the Community Heritage Center in particular. It's just not easy to find funding for this kind of work. And one way we've been able to make it happen is by linking it to site preservation. And we have mixed feelings about this because we believe that community heritage is valuable in its own right, like completely apart from site preservation. But El-Kurru does have site preservation challenges that are common to many sites in Sudan. And community engagement, I mean, it's well documented that it really does help with site preservation. And here is just a snapshot that I took of a panel at the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Merowe. And like at the bottom, you see those little images, and it's all the same issues that we have at El-Kurru, like people carving their names, climbing on the pyramids. So education and outreach really do help with things like this. And we do have this kind of education and outreach planned for the El-Kurru Community Heritage Center, and we are grateful to the J.M. Kaplan Fund for helping make that a reality. And then I have a final thought on challenges if we go to the next slide, Geoff. And that this project has made us realize what a privileged mobility is. When we started work on the Heritage Center, we had a pretty good idea of what the possibilities were, even in Sudan. But many of our El-Kurru colleagues didn't have the same frames of reference. So we'd been able to visit museums all over the world and all over Sudan. And many of our colleagues hadn't even had the chance to visit other major sites in Sudan, like Merowe, which is shown here on the slide, or Kerma. So in the beginning, we spent some time just visiting other sites and museums in Sudan so that we could start with some of the same grounding in what was out there and what might be possible for El-Kurru. And Geoff, I'm going to hand it back to you now.
okay, thanks, Suzanne. Okay, so I'm going to just give a quick thumbnail of what this centerpiece of our community engagement project looks like, this Community Heritage Center, which we're thinking of partly as an ongoing means of education about history and conservation for the site, for children and for the local community, and also talk about how we are thinking about trying to make this sustainable. Always a big problem with this kind of thing. So I mentioned that our community engagement work started with this presentation to local men. It continued the following year with just a bunch of conversations, you know, somewhat formal, organized conversations with different groups of people. Here on the right, you see a bunch of male village elders. On the left, you see much of the faculty of one of the local girls' primary schools. And just talking about what they knew about the site, what they might want to know about the site, how they thought about engagement with visitors to the site. Did they want, were they open to more engagement? Could they see benefits to that? Or did they want to, you know, I mean, some people don't like tourists that much, including some people. I know I grew up in San Francisco. We made a local business of hating tourists, at least when I was in high school. Anyway, so we had those conversations, and it turned out that they were actually quite interested on a variety of different levels in meeting tourists and having a chance to tell their own story, and especially a chance to feed visitors their own food. That was, you know, very much in keeping with Sudanese hospitality. So we started talking about the idea in general terms of having a visitor center. That's sort of where we started. And then we very quickly moved into thinking, okay, well, this is whatever we end up building should be not just for visitors to the site, but also for use by the community. So we started to refer to it as a community heritage center. And we started to think about how are we going to put a presentation about the local culture, the local place, the local village, which we had gotten to know and really to enjoy, you know, the people and the place. And somebody, I'm not sure at this point who it was, came up with the idea of having a photo competition. So the idea was we would open this to all residents of the village. They'd have all year to take pictures of aspects of their life. And then we'd have an evening event. We'd show all the photos, and a panel of foreigners and locals would choose winners. And, you know, in retrospect, we set up a scoring system so that if one judge really, really liked a photo, it was among the top 10. It was pretty funny. So some of the winning photos, I think I'll show you one of them. Some of them were crowd pleasers all around. Some of them were surprising, you know, kind of an artistic eye at geometric patterns in village architecture. There was surprisingly little kind of social event photography. This kid's wedding was, or sort of play wedding was one of the few exceptions. This landscape, beautiful sunset with the mosque and palm trees. And actually the photo I was thinking about was the cows. One judge really liked the cows, so they became a winning photo. And this is because, I mean, traditionally people in this part of Northeast Africa, they're part of this broader pattern of cattle, the cattle complex. And so cows are, you know, they symbolize wealth in addition to being wealth. So they have a lot of associations that made the local judges like them. In any case, we selected winners, and then we interviewed the winners to ask them what they were thinking about when they took the photo, why the photo was meaningful to them, and so on. So that in the end, this presentation of local culture is not just going to be a didactic description of the Shagia people, whatever, but it's going to be people through their own eyes and in their own words describing aspects of their life. So that was one component of this Heritage Center. We finally, this was a long process of figuring out how to build it, whether we're going to build from scratch or whether we're going to renovate an existing structure. And in the end, we decided to renovate an existing structure. Here we are just about to start work. That's our foreman, Mansour Muhammad Ahmed, also the director of the center, walking up to this house that had been abandoned for about 20 years, right next to the site. And this is a guy we've seen previously, Anwar Mahjoub, whose family owned the house, but has also been working with us in a variety of different capacities for many years. He had taught himself English, and as Suzanne mentioned, he's just been accepted finally. Well, we made him the curator of the Community Heritage Center, and he's just been accepted to the University of Michigan. So that's been quite not something we anticipated from the beginning exactly, but a great development. And this photo shows a moment where we're renovating his family's old house, and his father was a woodworker, and in the renovation we found one of his father's woodworking chisels. So it was a nice little moment. So here's just a schematic plan of what we're thinking about. We're thinking of two different groups of exhibition areas. The kind of the bright teal, color there are archaeological related exhibits. Suzanne mentioned that we'd have a walking tour of the site, and in the center we thought we would display aspects of the archaeological setting that were not immediately visible on the site, so sort of broader context and things like that. And then the yellow outlined area is where we're going to have the local heritage exhibit with photos and also some objects of local use. I wanted to just highlight one part of the archaeological exhibit because I think it's interesting, and I don't know what the ramifications of this will be for the longer term, but local people are often asking about what happened to all the objects that were excavated there by Reisner 100 years ago. And of course, many of them are in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where they've been carefully conserved and documented and very well kept over the last century. And so our plan for the archaeology exhibit is partly just to show people what objects were there that are not there now. And in our conversations with people, this particular issue, I mean, we'll see how it develops, but it didn't seem to be a particularly heated one. They were much more concerned about the idea that maybe the bones of the kings of the site were sitting in a museum storeroom somewhere. That would have been more upsetting to them. So anyway, this is a little binder where we'll have people can flip through in the Heritage Center and get a sense of that. These are a few photos from earlier this month, actually, of the state of the renovation. You know, like every renovation project through history in all places and all times, it has taken longer than expected and cost more than we thought it was going to, despite our long experience of working in the site. So we've finished a kitchen, which you can see in the center of the photo there. And we have finished some bathrooms, and we have also finished, you can just see sort of in the right part of the screen there, kind of a palm branch roof, and that shades an area where we're going to already be able to start our school visits and education program. And here's our first visit. It was kind of touching that this is going on. Anwar was able to arrange this, even though the Civil War is going on. It's quiet enough up in the north that some aspects of regular life can continue. And indeed, it's valuable to be able to have those things continue. I should say that all of the development of the programmatic material, that is the educational material, that people in the community also asked us to write a book for children, and this has turned out to be a really interesting project that's ended up centering around the idea of graffiti and leaving your mark. That's the name of the book. And so, you know, yes, we can understand why you would want to do that, but can you understand why we would not want you to do that? Carve your name on a monument. So, so that is where the Heritage Center stands right at the moment, and the end is in sight. And as soon as we are able to safely get back there and continue work on it, I feel optimistic we'll be able to finish it. So Suzanne has a few last comments here.
Yeah, I just wanted to see that conservation work at El-Kurru is ongoing, but because of our experiences at El-Kurru, which have been so wonderful, we have structured a new project in a different way, and we've done it deliberately from the very beginning. We started to work. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to leave out the specifics of Kururu conservation for now. We started work at the site of Jebel Barkal in 2019. This is about 20 minutes up the Nile River from El-Kurru, and it was the capital center and sort of religious cult center of the Kushite Empire at the time that the Kushite kings were being buried at El-Kurru. And on the conservation front, there's archaeological work going on here too, but on the conservation front, we had the opportunity to apply for through the U.S. Embassy in Sudan, and we were awarded a large grant from the United States Department of State, the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation. It's a big grant for us. It's $500,000. And this is for conservation and community work at Jebel Barkal. Let's go to the next slide. Because of our experiences at El-Kurru, we wrote the grant for this project with a focus on building both professional and local community networks. So every professional role on the project is staffed by one foreign and one Sudanese professional working in tandem. And El-Muntasser Dafala is my conservation counterpart. He's wonderful, and he should be in charge of all of Sudan right now, in my opinion. At right, you see conservation builders Safian Matwakal and conservation architect David Flory working together on stabilization of a wall. And let's go to the next slide, Geoff. So one of the projects we're working on is conservation of this particular temple, which is dedicated to sort of hybrid Nubian or Kushite Egyptian god. It dates to about, I don't know, 650 BCE-ish. And we have a couple other conservation projects ongoing at Jebel Barkal as well. But into this particular grant, we also built funding for community engagement activities. So let's go to the next slide, like community lectures. And so when you see Geoff here speaking at a community talk at the site, and then we also built in funding for professional development workshops. And you see our colleague Mahmoud Suleiman speaking about site preservation at a workshop that we held in Khartoum this year. And then we built in some funding for parties. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is our last slide, actually. So we had a big party this year at the site. We had about 70 people attending. We ate 3 tasty sheep that were grilled over fire, and they were delicious. And archaeological project co-director, Dr. Al-Hassan Ahmed Mohammed, and I even survived a runaway donkey during a donkey race at the party. And I'm telling you, it was kind of scary, but we made it. And in conclusion, I guess I want to say we're about 2 years into this project now. I really love what we've been able to do there so far. I'm hoping that we can go back soon. And that's the end of our talk, unless Geoff wants to add anything more. I think we have an acknowledgements slide as well.
No, Suzanne, you ended just the way I would have.